The C&P exam, that compensation and pension examination, is not merely a doctor's appointment. It is the single most crucial financial gateway in your life as a veteran. This is the moment where years of pain, sacrifice, and struggle are translated into a legal document, a medical opinion that determines your financial security for decades to come. If you treat this process lightly, if you approach this exam without absolute clarity and strategic preparation, you are risking everything. We are talking about the difference between financial stability and struggling to make ends meet, the difference between getting the care you earned and facing constant uphill battles with the system. And while the vast majority of VA and contracted examiners are professionals attempting to do their job correctly, the system is flawed, overburdened, and rife with inconsistencies. There are 5 specific types of clinics, 5 distinct situational red flags that veterans consistently report as the source of their most devastating, life-altering denials. If you receive an appointment notice sending you to one of these 5 specific environments, you need to pause, review your options, and approach that exam with extreme caution, or ideally, request a change immediately. This is about protecting your future, and we need to dive deep into why these 5 places are often where good claims go to die. The first type of facility you absolutely must approach with a massive dose of skepticism, the place that consistently generates negative outcomes, is what we call the Poinnau high-volume mill. This isn't necessarily a physical location you can look up on a map, but a mode of operation, a facility characterized by its relentless, almost frantic pace. Think of it as the assembly line of medical examinations. These clinics, often run by large national contracting companies, are designed for one thing: throughput. They measure success not by the quality of the medical opinion provided, but by the sheer volume of veterans they can process in an hour, a day, or a week. When you walk into a high-volume mill, you are often met with a sterile, impersonal environment, and the atmosphere feels more like a DMV waiting room than a healthcare facility. The staff are often overworked, the waiting times are erratic, and the examiner assigned to you is under immense pressure to keep the conveyor belt moving. They are incentivized, whether overtly or subtly, to spend the minimum amount of time required to check the boxes on the Disability Benefits Questionnaire, the DBQ, and move on to the next veteran waiting in line. What does this mean for your claim? It means the examiner, who may be perfectly qualified on paper, simply does not have the time, the emotional bandwidth, or the institutional encouragement to listen to the nuances of your condition. They are not afforded the luxury of reading your entire service treatment record, the extensive private medical documentation you submitted, or the detailed lay statements from your spouse and battle buddies. They are skimming the surface, looking for the fastest route to a conclusion. This often results in what is known as a 7-minute exam, where the veteran barely has time to introduce themselves, let alone fully articulate the functional limitations imposed by their disability. The key danger here is that complex conditions, especially those that fluctuate wildly, like migraines, chronic pain, or mental health disorders such as PTSD, require detailed observation and comprehensive history-taking. A 7-minute snapshot simply cannot capture the reality of a disability that renders you unable to work for 3 weeks out of every month. The examiner at the high-volume mill is often forced to rely on boilerplate language, generic descriptions that fail to establish the necessary nexus or severity required for a high rating. If your exam is scheduled at a location known for rapid-fire appointments, where you hear the constant opening and closing of doors and see a steady stream of veterans entering and exiting every 10 minutes, you are at risk. You are risking an incomplete picture being painted of your life, an incomplete assessment that the VA adjudicator will then rely upon to deny your claim, forcing you into a lengthy, agonizing, and expensive appeals process that could take years to resolve. This initial denial, rooted in a rushed exam, becomes a massive hurdle, a negative medical opinion that you must then spend immense resources trying to overcome. The administrative burden created by these high-volume facilities is astronomical, not just for the veteran, but for the entire VA system, because inadequate initial exams lead directly to increased appeals, higher administrative costs, and delayed justice for those who served. You must be prepared to assert yourself in this environment, bringing meticulously organized documentation to counteract the examiner's lack of preparation time, ensuring that every minute you are in that room is used efficiently to communicate the full extent of your functional limitations, not just the clinical diagnosis. The incentive structure driving these high-volume operations prioritizes speed over accuracy, and that structural flaw translates directly into unwarranted denials and lower ratings. We must understand that the contract model, while intended to alleviate the VA's backlog, sometimes creates perverse incentives for contractors to maximize the number of exams performed per hour, potentially compromising the thoroughness required to justly evaluate complex disability claims. This is not conjecture. This is a pattern observed across countless denial letters where the rationale cites insufficient evidence of functional impairment, which is often code for the examiner didn't spend enough time observing or documenting. Therefore, if your appointment notification points toward a facility known for this assembly line approach, understand that you are already starting the process from a defensive position, requiring double the preparation to ensure your narrative cuts through the noise and the haste. This structural deficiency in the high-volume mill is a silent killer of claims, a systemic issue that veterans must navigate by being hyper-prepared and uncompromising in their presentation of evidence. The sheer volume of veterans passing through these doors often means that the administrative staff are also overwhelmed, leading to mistakes in paperwork, delayed submission of the final report, and sometimes even the loss of critical supporting documents that you brought with you. This logistical chaos compounds the medical risk, turning a simple appointment into a high-stakes gamble against an overworked bureaucracy. The risk profile of these mills is elevated because the examiners themselves often experience high burnout, leading to decreased attention to detail and a generalized fatigue that can manifest as skepticism or indifference toward the veteran's testimony. We are talking about facilities that treat veterans as data points rather than human beings, and that dehumanizing process is what ultimately leads to the unjust outcomes. Moving to the second major red flag, the second type of clinic or situation you should treat with extreme caution involves the Yona remote, subcontracted hub with zero VA context. Now, the VA uses subcontractors for C&P exams constantly, and many of these contractors are excellent. But the specific danger here lies with the smaller, often newly established hubs or individual practitioners who have been contracted primarily because they are geographically convenient to the veteran, but who lack any deep institutional understanding of VA disability law, the specific rating criteria, or the unique culture of military service. These are the practitioners who might be experts in their medical field, a fantastic orthopedic surgeon or a seasoned clinical psychologist. But they treat the C&P exam exactly like a standard civilian medical appointment. They do not grasp that their role is not to treat you, but to provide a medical opinion strictly governed by the VA's schedule for rating disabilities, the 38 CFR. The crucial failure point here is the lack of VA context. They often fail to understand key concepts like the difference between incurred in service and aggravated by service, or the necessity of linking a current diagnosis to an in-service event through a clear, concise nexus statement. They might document your current symptoms perfectly, but then, when asked the crucial question on the DBQ, is this condition at least as likely as not due to service? They provide a vague, non-committal, or outright negative opinion simply because they are unfamiliar with the low evidentiary burden of the as likely as not standard, or because they haven't been trained to properly review the complex military records that often use acronyms and terminology foreign to civilian practice. This lack of specialized training means they often miss the subtle connections that form the basis of a successful claim, particularly secondary service connections. For example, a contract physician examining a veteran for a knee condition might focus solely on the joint itself, completely ignoring the documented history of medication side effects or the subsequent development of lower back pain due to altered gait. Secondary conditions that should be rated but are overlooked because the examiner lacks the holistic view required by the VA system. When an examiner lacks VA context, their final report often reads as clinically sound but legally useless. They use language that is ambiguous, failing to meet the legal requirements for evidence, such as stating, "it is possible," rather than, "it is at least as likely as not." These subtle linguistic failures, born from ignorance of VA requirements, are enough to trigger an immediate denial from the rating specialist. The financial implications of this error are profound, often resulting in months, if not years, of delay, as the veteran is forced to appeal the decision and potentially seek an independent medical opinion, IMO, to counteract the flawed contract exam. Furthermore, these remote hubs often have limited access to the VA's internal electronic health record system, the necessary tools for a truly comprehensive review. They rely solely on the documents forwarded to them by the contracting agency, which may be incomplete or poorly organized. If the examiner cannot efficiently review the entirety of your records, they are operating blind, and your claim suffers the consequences. You must ensure that any examiner you see, especially one working for a smaller, less established contractor, demonstrates a clear understanding of the VA's unique requirements. If you sense during the exam that the practitioner is treating you like a standard patient, asking about insurance or making recommendations for civilian treatment rather than focusing on the legal criteria of the DBQ, you are likely in a remote subcontracted hub that lacks the necessary context, and your claim is in jeopardy. This specific danger is compounded by the fact that the oversight mechanisms for these smaller, remote contractors can be weaker than for the large, established national chains. The quality control checks might be less rigorous, meaning that flawed or legally insufficient opinions are more likely to slip through the cracks and land directly on the desk of the VA adjudicator. The veteran becomes the unwitting victim of a systemic gap in quality assurance. This lack of specialized knowledge extends beyond just the nexus statement. It often impacts the severity rating. A civilian doctor may see a patient with mild depression and rate it according to standard civilian clinical scales, but fail to translate that impairment into the specific rating criteria outlined in the 38 CFR, which focuses heavily on occupational and social impairment. If the examiner doesn't use the specific language required by the VA rating schedule, the veteran is penalized. The subtle but crucial difference between a 30% rating and a 50% rating for a mental health condition, for instance, often hinges on the examiner's ability to correctly map symptoms to the regulatory language. A practitioner lacking this VA-specific training is simply unable to perform this crucial translation accurately, leading to an unfair and often significantly lower initial rating, once again forcing the veteran into the arduous and emotionally draining appeals process. The sheer depth of the VA system, with its thousands of pages of regulations and case law precedent, is not something a part-time contract examiner can absorb overnight. If the clinic you are assigned to seems unfamiliar with the basic structure of the DBQ forms, or if the examiner openly admits to having only recently started performing C&P exams without extensive prior training, this is an undeniable red flag, indicating a high probability of a context-deficient examination. The veteran must be prepared to gently but firmly guide the conversation back to the legal requirements of the VA, ensuring that the examiner addresses the specific service connection questions with the required legal language. The economic consequence of this deficiency is not just the immediate denial, but the cumulative loss of benefits over the years of appeal, which can easily amount to tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. The reliance on remote, context-deficient examiners is a significant flaw in the VA's attempt to outsource its workload, and it is a flaw that veterans must be hyper-aware of to protect their rightful compensation. The third type of clinic or examiner situation that demands extreme scrutiny is when you are scheduled with the specialist clinic that suffers from tunnel vision. This is a tricky situation because on the surface, seeing a highly specialized doctor sounds like a positive thing. If you have a complex gastrointestinal issue, seeing a top gastroenterologist seems ideal. If you have a rare nerve condition, seeing a neurologist specializing in that specific area sounds perfect. And often it is. However, the risk arises when that specialist, focused intensely on their narrow area of expertise, completely fails to acknowledge the interconnectedness of your disabilities and the broader context of your service-connected conditions. This is the danger of tunnel vision. The VA disability system operates on the principle of holistic impairment. The rating is based on the cumulative effect of all service-connected conditions on your ability to function socially and occupationally. A specialist focused entirely on the liver might provide an impeccable report on the severity of your hepatic impairment, but completely fail to document or even inquire about the secondary mental health conditions, the chronic fatigue, or the orthopedic issues that arose as a result of the primary condition or the medications used to treat it. The specialist's report, while clinically accurate for their niche, becomes a siloed piece of evidence that isolates the condition, preventing the VA from seeing the full, devastating picture of your total disability. For example, a veteran being examined for service-connected sleep apnea might see a pulmonologist. The pulmonologist confirms the diagnosis and the need for a CPAP machine. Excellent. But if that pulmonologist ignores the fact that the sleep apnea is secondary to the veteran's service-connected PTSD, a common and well-established link, they have missed the crucial nexus that would link the two conditions, potentially increasing the overall rating and clarifying the root cause for future treatment. Their tunnel vision prevents them from looking outside the boundaries of the respiratory system. The resulting report is often brilliant in its narrow scope, but fatally flawed in its failure to establish the secondary connections that could lead to significantly higher compensation. The VA rating system often rewards the cumulative effect of disabilities, and when a specialist focuses only on one limb of the tree, they miss the forest entirely. Furthermore, the specialist may use clinical language appropriate for their field that does not directly translate to the functional impairment criteria demanded by the VA. They might state that the condition is stable or managed, which in a civilian context means the ideal patient is doing well. But for the VA, stable might still mean the veteran cannot hold a job due to chronic pain or severe flare-ups. The specialist's tunnel vision prevents them from asking the crucial question: how does this condition prevent you from working or engaging in daily life activities? If the specialist is focused only on biological markers or clinical test results, they fail to capture the subjective but critical reality of the veteran's functional limitations. To mitigate this risk, if you are scheduled with a highly specialized clinic, you must proactively bring documentation that clearly outlines all your service-connected conditions, even those not directly related to the specialist's field, and be prepared to articulate the connections between them. You must become the conductor of the orchestra, ensuring the specialist understands that their role is part of a much larger, complex disability claim. If the specialist dismisses your concerns about related conditions, stating, "I only deal with the spine," or "that's a psychological issue, I can't comment on that," you are in a situation where their tunnel vision is actively working against your claim, limiting the scope of the evidence provided to the VA adjudicator. This situation often arises because the specialist is paid to address a single, specific diagnostic code, and they feel professionally obligated to stay within those lines, unaware that the VA rules encourage a broader, more comprehensive view of the veteran's overall health and functional capacity. This hyper-focus, while medically rigorous, is legally detrimental to the veteran seeking maximum fair compensation. The specialist's detailed examination, while technically superior in its narrow field, often lacks the necessary breadth to satisfy the holistic requirements of the VA rating schedule. For instance, a specialist in cardiology might conduct an exhaustive examination of the heart, meticulously documenting ejection fraction and exercise tolerance. However, if the veteran also suffers from service-connected tinnitus, a condition often rated separately but contributing to overall stress and sleep disturbance, the cardiologist's tunnel vision will ignore it entirely. The VA system demands that every service-connected impairment be documented, and when a specialist intentionally or unintentionally limits their scope, the veteran is left with an incomplete record. The sheer complexity of service-connected disabilities often means that one condition exacerbates another. For example, chronic lower back pain, orthopedic, leads to severe insomnia and depression, mental health, which in turn limits physical activity, leading to weight gain and potentially metabolic syndrome, internal medicine. A specialist in any one of these fields, focused solely on their domain, will miss the causal links, thereby undermining potential secondary service connections that could significantly increase the veteran's combined disability rating. This failure to connect the dots is a direct consequence of the specialist operating outside the VA's comprehensive framework. The veteran must proactively bridge this gap using their personal statement and lay evidence to explicitly detail the chain of causation, effectively forcing the specialist to acknowledge, if not formally rate, the related conditions. If the specialist refuses to even consider the broader context, the resulting report will be insufficient, often requiring the veteran to seek another, more generalized C&P exam or an expensive private medical opinion to correct the record. This is a systemic issue where medical expertise inadvertently clashes with legal necessity, and the veteran pays the price for the lack of coordination and holistic perspective. The financial implication here is not just a lower rating, but the permanent exclusion of valid secondary claims that were never properly introduced into the evidentiary record because the specialist deemed them outside their purview. The fourth major red flag, and perhaps the most emotionally draining situation to encounter, involves the clinic where you are scheduled with. The examiner who has a known history of negative opinions. The denial doctor. This is a critical warning, and it requires you to do your homework. While the VA and its contractors do not publicly publish the names or track records of their examiners, veterans are highly organized, and information about examiners, good and bad, often circulates within veterans groups, forums, and social media communities. The denial doctor is an examiner who has developed a consistent documented pattern of providing negative medical opinions, often resulting in claims denials, regardless of the veteran's overwhelming evidence. They may be technically proficient, but their reports consistently lean toward less likely than not when assessing service connection, or they minimize the severity of functional impairment, consistently rating conditions at the lowest possible level despite clear evidence of distress. Why does this happen? The reasons are complex and varied. Sometimes the examiner holds a personal bias against the VA system or veterans seeking compensation. Sometimes they are simply overly conservative, adhering to an extremely high standard of proof that goes beyond the legal as likely as not standard. In other cases, they may be suffering from burnout and have developed a generalized skepticism toward all claims. Regardless of the reason, their pattern of negative reporting is a massive liability to your claim. If you receive an appointment notification and upon researching the examiner's name in veteran communities, you find multiple warnings, consistent reports of dismissiveness, or a documented pattern of reports that are easily overturned on appeal, you must take immediate action. Attending an exam with a known denial doctor means you are entering a high-stakes battle where the odds are already stacked against you. You are practically guaranteed to receive a negative opinion, which means you are essentially volunteering to spend the next 2 to 5 years fighting an appeal simply because you attended that initial exam. The financial cost of this delay is immense, and the psychological toll of fighting a biased opinion is devastating. What can you do? You have a right to request a change of examiner or a change of location if you have a compelling reason. While simply citing a bad reputation might not be enough, if you can articulate a specific rational concern, such as a conflict of interest, an inability to travel due to the location, or a documented, specific instance of the examiner's reports being overturned due to procedural error, you may be able to successfully request a substitution. More often, however, you will be forced to attend the exam. If you must attend an exam with a known denial doctor, your preparation must be absolutely flawless. You must treat the exam not as a medical appointment, but as a deposition. You must bring a trusted witness if allowed, and meticulously record every detail of the interaction, the time spent, the questions asked, and the specific physical tests performed. Your goal is to gather evidence of procedural deficiency or bias that can be used later to successfully challenge the examiner's opinion on appeal. You must anticipate every argument the denial doctor might make to minimize your claim and provide overwhelming counter-evidence, focusing strictly on objective medical records and the detailed lay statements from those who observe your daily limitations. The stakes here are not just a denial, but the establishment of a negative medical opinion that will carry significant weight throughout the appeals process, requiring an even more robust and expensive independent medical opinion to overcome. Allowing a known denial doctor to examine you is a strategic error that places a monumental, unnecessary burden on your shoulders, prolonging your wait for rightful compensation and increasing the mental anguish associated with fighting the bureaucracy. This risk is particularly acute in specialized fields like mental health, where the subjective nature of the symptoms allows for greater latitude in interpretation, making it easier for a biased examiner to minimize the severity of conditions like major depressive disorder or PTSD without easily verifiable objective markers to contradict them. The institutional knowledge veterans share about these specific examiners is a crucial defense mechanism against the systemic failures of quality control within the contracting system. The VA, while claiming neutrality, sometimes struggles to remove examiners who consistently generate poor quality or biased reports, often due to contractual obligations or the sheer difficulty of recruiting replacements. Therefore, the veteran must become their own quality control mechanism. The financial impact of a negative opinion from a denial doctor is immediate and catastrophic. It halts the claim process entirely and forces the veteran into the lengthy and unpredictable supplemental claim or higher-level review process. Furthermore, a highly negative opinion can sometimes poison the well for future claims, as subsequent examiners may be influenced by the prior unfavorable findings, creating a persistent, negative cloud over the veteran's entire medical history within the VA system. This is why the effort expended to research and potentially avoid or counteract an appointment with a known denial doctor is an essential investment in the long-term success of the disability claim. The sheer volume of evidence required to overturn a well-written, even if biased, negative medical opinion is often staggering, requiring multiple private consultations and independent medical experts, all of which represent a significant out-of-pocket expense that the veteran who is already struggling financially should not have to bear. Thus, the fourth red flag is less about the physical location of the clinic and more about the toxic reputation of the individual practitioner assigned to your case, a reputation that must be taken seriously and handled with extreme strategic precision. Finally, the fifth type of clinic situation that should be avoided whenever possible involves the clinic that requires excessive travel and logistical strain. While the VA is required to provide reasonable access to examinations, sometimes appointments are scheduled at locations that impose an unreasonable physical, emotional, or logistical burden on the veteran, and this burden can directly and negatively impact the outcome of the exam. The danger here is twofold. First, the stress and physical exertion of the travel itself can skew the exam findings, and second, the logistical nightmare can lead to missed appointments or poor performance during the exam. Consider a veteran with severe chronic back pain and limited mobility. Being required to drive 4 hours, sit in traffic, and then wait for an hour in a crowded waiting room before the exam will inevitably exacerbate their pain and stiffness. When the examiner asks them to perform range of motion tests, the results will be influenced by the travel-induced flare-up, potentially leading the examiner to document a lower functional capacity than is typical. Or conversely, if the veteran has taken excessive medication to manage the travel pain, the examiner might misinterpret the symptom presentation. The travel itself becomes a confounding variable in the medical assessment. More critically, for veterans dealing with severe mental health conditions, particularly PTSD, long-distance travel, navigating unfamiliar urban environments, and dealing with crowded public spaces can trigger intense anxiety, panic attacks, or dissociative episodes. If a veteran arrives at their mental health C&P exam already emotionally exhausted, agitated, or on the verge of a panic attack due to the travel logistics, their ability to clearly and rationally articulate the severity of their symptoms is severely compromised. They may shut down, minimize their experiences, or simply be unable to provide coherent answers, leading the examiner to conclude that the symptoms are less severe than they truly are. This is a direct negative consequence of the logistical strain. Furthermore, the administrative burden of excessive travel, arranging transportation, coordinating childcare, taking significant time off work, adds immense stress to an already stressful process. If a veteran misses an appointment due to logistical failures related to excessive travel, a flat tire 200 miles from home, a flight delay, etc., the VA often treats this as a failure to report, which can lead to the outright denial of the claim or, at the very least, a significant delay while the appointment is rescheduled. The VA does have procedures for authorizing travel reimbursement and assisting with logistics, but these systems are often slow, cumbersome, and fail to account for the unique medical needs of veterans with severe physical or psychological impairments. If the appointment notice requires travel that will clearly aggravate your service-connected condition, for instance, requiring a veteran with severe knee instability to take a long-haul bus trip, or requiring a veteran with severe TBI and sensitivity to light and noise to navigate a massive, bustling metropolitan medical center, you have a legitimate basis to request a reasonable accommodation or a change of location. The VA is legally obligated to ensure that the exam environment does not prejudice the outcome of the claim. When the location and travel requirements themselves become a source of physical or mental deterioration just prior to the examination, the integrity of the medical opinion is compromised. Therefore, the fifth red flag is less about the quality of the medical practitioner and more about the systemic failure to accommodate the veteran's existing disabilities, turning the necessary act of attending the exam into an obstacle course that actively works against a fair and accurate assessment of their impairment. The financial risk here is the denial based on an inaccurate assessment, or the administrative denial due to a missed appointment caused by logistical impossibility. This subtle but profound impact of travel on symptom presentation is often overlooked by the bureaucratic system scheduling the appointments. For a veteran with fibromyalgia or complex regional pain syndrome, a 2-hour drive sitting upright can induce a pain flare-up that lasts for days, making the required physical maneuvers during the exam excruciatingly difficult or impossible, leading to a documentation of limited range of motion that the examiner might incorrectly attribute solely to the underlying condition, rather than the acute travel stress. The veteran must be prepared to explicitly state during the exam that their current level of pain or distress is significantly elevated due to the travel required, ensuring that this crucial confounding variable is noted in the medical report. If the examiner fails to document this fact, the report becomes immediately challengeable as procedurally flawed, as it fails to account for the temporary exacerbation of symptoms caused by the examination process itself. The distance and complexity of the travel also impact the veteran's ability to bring a supportive companion or advocate. If the clinic is so remote or logistically challenging that the veteran must travel alone, they lose the benefit of having a third party present who can observe the examination, take notes, and help the veteran stay focused and articulate, especially crucial for those with TBI or cognitive impairments. The lack of this support necessitated by the difficult travel can further degrade the quality of the veteran's presentation and the resulting medical opinion. The VA's duty to assist includes ensuring that the examination process is fair and subjecting a veteran to an unnecessarily grueling travel schedule that directly impacts their medical presentation is a violation of that duty. Therefore, veterans must be vigilant in reviewing their appointment letters and immediately challenging any assignment that places an unreasonable logistical burden on their already compromised health. The cumulative effect of these 5 red flags, the rushed pace of the high-volume mill, the ignorance of the subcontracted hub, the narrow focus of the specialist, the inherent bias of the denial doctor, and the physical toll of the logistical nightmare, creates a minefield for the unprepared veteran. We have now meticulously detailed the 5 specific environments and situations that pose the highest risk to a successful C&P examination and, consequently, to your entire disability claim. The high-volume mill sacrifices thoroughness for speed, often resulting in a 7-minute snapshot that fails to capture the fluctuating reality of complex conditions, leading to denials based on insufficient evidence of functional impairment and necessitating lengthy, costly appeals to overturn the initial, rushed assessment. This environment, driven by contract incentives that prioritize throughput, consistently generates boilerplate reports that lack the personalized detail required for accurate rating under the 38 CFR. The administrative chaos and examiner burnout inherent in these mills compound the medical risk, demanding that the veteran arrive hyper-prepared to counteract the systemic haste and lack of attention. Secondly, the remote, subcontracted hub, without adequate VA context, introduces risk through sheer ignorance of disability law. The medical expertise of the practitioner is often overshadowed by their profound lack of understanding regarding the as likely as not standard, the nuances of secondary service connection, and the crucial mapping of symptoms to the VA's specific rating schedule. This deficiency results in legally useless reports filled with vague language, forcing the veteran into a protracted fight to establish basic legal criteria that should have been documented during the initial exam. The absence of deep institutional knowledge means vital connections are missed, and the veteran is penalized for the examiner's lack of specialized training in VA disability adjudication requirements. Thirdly, the specialist clinic suffering from tunnel vision while providing excellent clinical insight into a single diagnosis often fails disastrously in the holistic assessment required by the VA. By focusing only on their narrow field, these specialists overlook critical secondary conditions, fail to document the interconnectedness of disabilities, and use clinical language that does not translate effectively to the functional impairment criteria necessary for accurate VA rating. This siloed approach undermines the cumulative nature of disability compensation, leaving valid secondary claims unaddressed and resulting in lower overall ratings, forcing the veteran to seek additional exams or expensive external opinions to connect the medical dots that the specialist missed. Fourth, the appointment with the examiner, who has a known history of negative opinions, the so-called denial. Doctor presents an existential threat to the claim. This is a battle you are statistically unlikely to win without extraordinary effort. The pattern of bias or overly conservative reporting from these examiners establishes a negative medical opinion that is incredibly difficult and expensive to overturn, prolonging the appeal process by years and inflicting massive psychological and financial stress. The only recourse is meticulous preparation, treating the exam as a legal deposition, and gathering evidence of procedural deficiency to challenge the inevitable negative findings, turning the encounter into a fact-finding mission for the subsequent appeal. And finally, the fifth red flag, the clinic requiring excessive travel and logistical strain, jeopardizes the claim by physically and psychologically compromising the veteran before the exam even begins. The stress and physical exertion of difficult travel can acutely exacerbate symptoms, leading to an inaccurate assessment of the veteran's typical functional capacity. For those with PTSD, TBI, or chronic pain, the travel itself can induce a flare-up that either skews the exam findings or, worse, leads to a missed appointment and administrative denial. The VA's obligation to provide reasonable accommodation is paramount here, and the veteran must assert their right to an exam setting that does not actively prejudice the outcome of their assessment. The common thread running through all 5 of these high-risk scenarios is the systemic failure to prioritize the veteran's well-being and the accuracy of the assessment over administrative expediency or contractual cost-saving measures. Your defense against these systemic flaws is knowledge and preparation. Never walk into a C&P exam unprepared. Treat every minute of that appointment, especially in one of these 5 environments, as the most important financial negotiation of your life. Document everything, record the time spent, bring your medical records. Articulate your functional limitations clearly and repeatedly. If you are forced to attend an exam in one of these high-risk settings, you must assume the examiner is already biased, rushed, or ignorant of the VA's specific requirements. Your job is to provide such overwhelming, undeniable evidence, both objective and subjective, that any negative opinion they render is easily refuted on appeal due to its factual insufficiency or procedural flaws. Your future, your financial stability, and your access to the health care you earned are too important to leave to chance. Take control of this process, use the information you now have, and ensure that the C&P examination serves as the gateway to the compensation you deserve, not another roadblock in your journey toward healing and security. Remember, the fight isn't over if you get a bad exam report. The fight is simply escalating, and you must be ready to meet that escalation with superior evidence and unwavering resolve. This is not just a battle for benefits. It is a battle for recognition, dignity, and the future you earned. Be prepared, be vigilant, and never give up the fight.